The disintegration of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia in the 1990s was one of the most violent and tragic events to unfold in post-Second World War Europe. The collapse of this multi-ethnic federation unleashed a series of interrelated conflicts characterized not only by conventional warfare, but also by mass atrocities, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. Far from being a spontaneous descent into chaos, the Yugoslav wars were the result of decades of simmering tensions, structural weaknesses in the federation, the rise of exclusionary nationalist ideologies, and the manipulation of historical grievances by political elites. The wars that followed the dissolution of Yugoslavia left over 130,000 people dead and millions displaced, permanently altering the political, demographic, and psychological landscape of the Balkans. Yugoslavia was initially formed in the aftermath of the First World War as the Kingdom of Serbs-Croats and Slovenes, and was later reconstituted as a socialist federation following the Second World War under the leadership of Marshal Josip Broz Tito. The country was comprised of 6 republics: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, and Macedonia, as well as 2 autonomous provinces within Serbia, Kosovo and Vojvodina. Each republic housed distinct ethnic and religious groups, including but not limited to Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, Slovenes, Albanians, and Macedonians. Under Tito's authoritarian rule, nationalist sentiments were forcibly suppressed, and a pan-Yugoslav identity was promoted through a centralized, yet decentralized, form of socialist governance. However, following Tito's death in the year 1980, the delicate balance of power began to unravel. Throughout the 1980s, Yugoslavia experienced a deepening economic crisis marked by rising unemployment, inflation, and significant external debt. These economic pressures exacerbated existing regional inequalities and triggered political fragmentation. Simultaneously, nationalist ideologies began to re-emerge across the republics. In Serbia, Slobodan Milosevic rose to prominence by presenting himself as the champion of Serbian national interests. He centralized control over Serbia and its provinces, undermining the federal structure and inciting fears among other republics that Serbia sought to dominate the entire federation. In response, leaders in Slovenia and Croatia, such as Milan Kwan and Franjo Tuđman respectively, moved toward independence. The collapse of the one-party state and the introduction of multi-party elections in the early 1990s paved the way for the dissolution of the Yugoslav Federation. The first military confrontation occurred in Slovenia in June of 1991, following its declaration of independence. The Yugoslav People's Army, largely under Serbian control, attempted to reassert federal authority, but was met with limited resistance. The conflict, known as the 10-Day War, ended swiftly with few casualties. However, the war in Croatia that followed was far more brutal. Serb militias, supported by the Yugoslav People's Army, sought to carve out ethnically homogeneous regions within Croatia. Cities such as Vukovar were besieged and devastated, and civilians were targeted in massacres and expulsions. Yet, the most horrific violence unfolded in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where ethnic diversity was most pronounced, and no single group held a majority. In April of 1992, Bosnia and Herzegovina declared independence following a referendum boycotted by most Bosnian Serbs. What ensued was a catastrophic war among Bosniaks, Bosnian Muslims, Croats, and Serbs. The Bosnian Serb leadership, under Radovan Karadzic and military commander General Ratko Mladic, launched a campaign to create a greater Serbia by eliminating non-Serb populations from vast swaths of territory. With material and logistical support from Serbia, Bosnian Serb forces engaged in a systematic campaign of ethnic cleansing. The siege of Sarajevo lasted nearly 4 years, during which the city was subjected to daily shelling and sniper attacks. Thousands of civilians were killed, including children. The international community watched helplessly as Europe witnessed the return of concentration camps, mass graves, and organized atrocities. One of the darkest chapters of the Bosnian War was the Srebrenica massacre of July 1995. Despite being designated a safe area by the United Nations, the town of Srebrenica fell to Bosnian Serb forces. Over the course of several days, more than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys were systematically executed, their bodies dumped into mass graves. The massacre was later classified as an act of genocide by both the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and the International Court of Justice. The Srebrenica genocide was not an isolated event, but rather the most extreme manifestation of a broader strategy of ethnic cleansing that included forced deportations, rape as a tool of war, and the deliberate destruction of cultural and religious sites. Ethnic cleansing during the Yugoslav wars was carried out in a deliberate and coordinated fashion. Villages were attacked, inhabitants were expelled or killed, and homes were looted and destroyed to prevent the return of refugees. Women were systematically raped, often in detention camps, as part of an effort to degrade communities and assert dominance. The perpetrators of these crimes were not rogue elements, but rather functioned with the support and complicity of political and military leadership. While the majority of documented atrocities were committed by Serb forces, Croat and Bosniak militias also committed war crimes, including the destruction of mosques and churches, retaliatory killings, and the abuse of prisoners of war. The international community's response to the unfolding crisis was initially marked by indecision and ineffectiveness. The United Nations deployed peacekeeping forces under the banner of the United Nations Protection Force, but these troops were under-resourced and hampered by restrictive mandates. Their inability to prevent massacres, protect civilians, or intervene meaningfully in combat operations severely damaged the credibility of the United Nations. Eventually, after repeated atrocities and increasing public pressure in Western nations, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization launched a series of airstrikes against Bosnian Serb positions in the summer of 1995. This intervention, combined with diplomatic pressure, led to the negotiation of the Dayton Peace Agreement in December of the same year. The Dayton Accord succeeded in ending the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but entrenched the ethnic divisions it sought to resolve. The country was divided into two entities: the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, primarily composed of Bosniaks and Croats, and the Republika Srpska, dominated by Serbs. This structure institutionalized ethnicity in governance and continues to hinder effective political decision-making and reconciliation to this day. Meanwhile, violence erupted once again in the southern province of Kosovo. The Kosovo Liberation Army launched a guerrilla campaign against Serbian forces, who responded with another campaign of ethnic cleansing targeting ethnic Albanians. The situation prompted the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to initiate an aerial bombing campaign against the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia in 1999, forcing Serbian withdrawal from Kosovo. In the aftermath of the wars, the international community sought to deliver justice through the establishment of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Based in The Hague, the tribunal indicted 161 individuals for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Among those prosecuted were former heads of state, military generals, and paramilitary leaders. Slobodan Milovi became the first sitting head of state to be tried before an international criminal tribunal. Although he died in custody before a verdict was reached, his prosecution marked a watershed moment in the pursuit of international justice. The tribunal's work, though controversial in some quarters, helped establish legal precedents and gave voice to victims of the conflict. Despite these efforts, the legacy of the Yugoslav wars continues to haunt the region. Bosnia and Herzegovina remains politically paralyzed, with nationalist rhetoric frequently threatening the fragile peace. Serbia and Kosovo have yet to normalize relations, and tensions persist in areas with ethnically mixed populations. Many war criminals have returned to public life as politicians or community leaders, and denialism regarding atrocities remains widespread. Efforts at reconciliation have been driven largely by civil society, youth groups, and survivors who seek to preserve the memory of the victims and build a future based on mutual respect and understanding. The Yugoslav wars serve as a stark reminder of how quickly a society can unravel when political leaders exploit ethnic identities for power. The deliberate use of propaganda, historical revisionism, and fear-mongering created an environment where neighbors turned against neighbors, and humanity was abandoned in pursuit of ethnically pure territories. These wars were not ancient ethnic hatreds come to life, they were engineered conflicts, constructed through deliberate political strategies in the context of a failing state and an indifferent international order. The lessons of the Balkans are global in nature. They compel us to remain vigilant against the forces of nationalism, authoritarianism, and xenophobia, which can so easily ignite violence even in seemingly stable societies.